Hello, everyone. Welcome to Riskline's first ever informal webcast. This webcast will be on our 2021 risk forecast, and I will be presenting it. My name is Aaron, and I'm a senior analyst here at Riskline. Riskline is a travel risk intelligence company. We provide country and city risk assessments and real-time alert messaging to fulfill duty of care requirements before and during travel. Trusted by global travel management companies, small businesses, and everyone in between, Riskline operates as a geographically distributed team in over 15 countries and across 11 different time zones. Before I begin this presentation, here's a brief background about myself. I studied political science and international relations up to the master's level at the University of Wellington, Victoria University of Wellington. I joined Riskline in February 2015, and my areas of expertise include Southeast and East Asian political and security risks, as well as travel safety issues pertaining to the global business traveler. Now, before we move into our 2021 forecast, let's look at some of the key developments in 2020 that our analysts got right in the previous year's forecast. So 2020 saw major protests against racial discrimination and police brutality, triggered by fatal police-involved shootings in the US that spurred the Black Lives Matter or BLM movement and inspired similar demonstrations around the world, like the End SARS protests in Nigeria. There were also more frequent and severe natural disasters, such as the unprecedented wildfires in Australia and in the US state of California. Meanwhile, of course, we witnessed the emergence of the global COVID-19 pandemic that brought travel to a grinding halt across the world. While we are not typically in the business of predicting the future, our analysts identified these developments in 2020 based on detailed analysis of ongoing and emerging trends. The deadly wildfires in Australia and California, for example, are a result of the ongoing effect of climate change, which has led to more severe weather and volatile environmental conditions. Likewise, in the case of the BLM protests, we highlighted a rise in anti-systemic demonstrations as a key risk for 2020 due to growing popular discontent with governments in many countries, including the US. Additionally, while we did not predict a pandemic on the magnitude of COVID-19, we did indicate in our 2020 forecast that increasing migration and urbanization, coupled with strained health infrastructure and weak government response, would see more outbreaks of infectious diseases. Now let's look ahead at what's in store for the rest of 2021. COVID-19 will continue to impact global travel in a negative way, even as the global travel industry gradually recovers from absolute standstill that it experienced through most of 2020. The pandemic's disruptive and ever-changing effect on the travel ecosystem will certainly continue in 2021. The desire for countries to limit exposure to COVID-19 will put pressure on travelers to obtain mandatory documentation relating to insurance, testing, pre-approved accommodation, and eventually vaccination prior to travel, which imposes additional cost burdens on travelers. Entry and exit restrictions imposed by governments and or the assessment of their COVID-19 situation in a traveler's country of origin can change at short notice, further complicating global travel. Travelers in most countries should continue to expect measures such as health screening, quarantine and testing, socially distanced seating arrangements, and contactless check-ins or transactions at airports, major public transport hubs, hotels, and other facilities. Expect renewed lockdowns in high-risk areas and a reduction in capacity for transportation services of all kinds to be the new norm in 2021. Natural disasters due to the effects of climate change, as well as the compounding effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, will continue to be more severe. Disasters such as tropical and winter storms, wildfires, and monsoon rainfall in 2021 will continue to be more severe, and emergency services personnel will be unable to respond to them in a timely manner in countries grappling with a new wave of COVID-19 infections. Slow and inadequate response by emergency services was witnessed in countries such as the US, Bahamas, Barbados during Hurricanes Laura and Delta between August and October 2020. Where in some instances, people avoided evacuation shelters due to the risk of spread of COVID-19 in close quarters. In India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines, meanwhile, when a series of cyclones hit between August and November 2020, emergency personnel were unable to evacuate residents or provide aid relief in many COVID-19 affected areas, where they were not allowed to enter due to ongoing lockdowns. This trend will be similar when natural disasters hit countries in 2021, as emergency services are still understaffed and stretched thin, and most resources have been allocated towards tackling the COVID-19 outbreak. Countries particularly at risk from natural disasters amid an outbreak during 2021 include the US, Italy, Kazakhstan, and Russia during the winter storm season between January and March, Brazil, Greece, Indonesia, and the US between April and August, as well as Australia and New Zealand between January and April during their respective wildfire seasons, as well as India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, China, and Pakistan during the cyclone and monsoon seasons between May and November. Health systems will continue to be stressed and overburdened this in 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed most health systems to their limits, exposing long-standing gaps in public health infrastructure and healthcare in many countries. A WHO study from 105 countries indicates that some 90% of countries experience disruptions to essential healthcare services, with low and middle income countries reporting the greatest difficulties during the pandemic. Routine immunization, diagnosis, and treatment of non-communicable diseases, cancer and malaria, as well as family planning, contraception, and treatment for mental health disorders have been the most affected. Distressingly, emergency services also experience disruptions in many countries. The pandemic will continue to test the ability of health systems to withstand shocks and maintain routine functions, and while mitigating downstream health effects into 2021 and beyond. With many countries in the sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East regions, particularly with the weakest capacity to cope with the added burden of the pandemic. The cancellation or postponement of elective services and online patient consultations can also be expected to continue in many high-income countries. 2021 will also see the added threat of social unrest. The IMF estimated that the global economy shrunk by approximately 4.4% in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The effects of this recession will continue to be felt in 2021, even with the deployment of a vaccine. Lower tax receipts and ballooning public deficits are likely to force governments across the world to implement painful austerity measures, including cuts to social programs and unemployment benefits. These actions carry with them the potential to trigger popular unrest led by activist organizations such as the Yellow Vest movement in France and the People's Assembly Against Austerity in the United Kingdom. Right-wing organizations in particular have increased their visibility and membership in the US, Canada, and Europe to protest COVID-19 restrictions, and will likely turn their attention to castigating vaccination campaigns and seeking the ouster of incumbents on all sides of the political spectrum. Disinformation to engage a wide coalition of low information voters will proliferate and bring together loose coalitions of wildly divergent but populist factions. The speed with which life is able to return to a semblance of pre-2020 normalcy, particularly economically, will determine if these new coalitions will have any staying power. But their anti-establishment, anti-state, and anti-expert messaging has already transformed populist politics worldwide, particularly in the US and the UK. Moving on to the Middle East, tensions between Iran and Israel, its Gulf Arab rivals, especially Saudi Arabia, and the United States, reached new heights in 2020 with the assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani in January and the country's top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, in November. Iran has vowed to avenge both deaths, and its parliament approved a bill to suspend UN inspections of their nuclear program. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities have warned their own nuclear scientists and citizens to exercise increased caution in anticipation of possible attacks. A direct Iranian retaliation on US interests is unlikely, but the government will continue to develop its nuclear capabilities and support allies and proxies in Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. Iran's ability to retaliate has been hampered by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on an already ailing economy. And while a delayed response is expected in 2021, much will depend on the policy taken by President Joe Biden towards Iran, Israel, and the Gulf Arab states in 2021. Moving on to the Horn of Africa, on November 28, 2020, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared victory over the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, or the TPLF, after federal forces captured the regional capital Mekelle following a near month-long conflict in the northern Tigray region. The conflict has exacerbated ethnic tensions within Ethiopia, spilled over into Eritrea, where TPLF forces have already fired rockets towards Asmara, the capital, and triggered the displacement of tens of thousands of Tigrayans across the Sudanese border. A protracted guerrilla insurgency is increasingly likely in the months ahead after TPLF leaders pledge to continue fighting. And the prospect of disintegration and civil war looms as further fighting threatens to draw other regional states into the conflict. Finally, the wider Horn of Africa region is at increased risk of destabilization as the conflict could further spill over into neighboring states, including Eritrea, Sudan, and Somalia, and worsen existing humanitarian, security, and political challenges in these countries. Global political uncertainty will continue in 2021 amid a post-Brexit UK and a post-Trump US. On 1st January 2021, the UK completed its year-long transition following the country's exit from the European Union. Despite narrowly avoiding a no-deal Brexit, serious concerns remain over future agreements between the UK and EU, with implications for the economy and the Northern Ireland peace accords. The effects of Brexit will be just one of the several uncertainties to watch out for in 2021. While Democrat Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 United States presidential elections generated optimism, he will have big challenges ahead in economic recovery and fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, as the number of new cases rose to a record high during the final months of the Trump administration. Countries will have to consider whether the reversal of many of the Trump administration's actions by Biden will not simply be reversed should a Republican be elected again in 2024, and plan accordingly. France, with the presidential election approaching in 2022, will likely be the locus of US attention, more so than the UK. While Biden's administration will shore up alliances, countries will enter into regional blocs less dependent on the US in the event of further political turmoil. NATO will, in particular, have to address the Turkish elephant in the room as President Erdogan continues to insert himself in the domestic politics of other European member states and engage in military adventurism across the Middle East and Southern Caucasus. Additionally, Asia-Pacific partners of the US, such as Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, will demand greater attention to deal with an emboldened People's Republic of China, which crushed dissent in Hong Kong and Xinjiang without concern for the international community's response and is riding high on its triumph of containing the pandemic with lower loss of life than many other countries. Finally, 2021 will also likely witness a rise in violent crime. An increase in crimes such as carjackings and burglaries is expected in developing and semi-developed countries whose governments are unable to provide adequate financial aid and other forms of financial relief amid the economic downturn triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. The massive economic burden has already caused an increase in often deadly bandit and kidnapping for ransom attacks in Nigeria and armed break-ins in Iran and Mauritania in 2020. While in Brazil, meanwhile, highly organized bank robberies have paralyzed entire cities on more than one occasion. As the pandemic rages on and the economic strain grows, criminal groups will likely have bigger recruitment pools, particularly among adolescents due to the closure of schools and universities and the lack of job opportunities. Due to this, incidents of violent crime will likely increase in countries that have already experienced high crime rates, such as Venezuela and South Africa. A rise in opportunistic crime, such as looting and muggings, may occur in countries such as Egypt, where organized groups do not normally operate. In the same way we produce our 2020 forecast, we hope that our 2021 forecast, based on the careful examination of key global developments in 2020 by an experienced team of risk analysts, will help you make sense of the state of the world and inform your planning for this year. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Riskline or schedule a demo of our travel risk intelligence solutions, get in touch via contact@riskline.com or visit our website at www.riskline.com. Thank you.